Hi everyone, hope everyone's doing good. Today we have a very fun project. Today I have these huge ash blanks. And I would like these ash blanks to become live edge bowls. So today we're going to be turning a large, I think these are around 10 inches, 11 inches. Probably going to be roughly around 10 by the end of it. So 10-inch live edge bowls. So let's get it mounted on the chuck. And let's get to it. Into the chuck. So today we're going to be turning what I would call a simple live edge bowl. So what do I mean by a simple live edge bowl? It's very simply the opposite of turning a regular salad bowl or large bowl. So the way the wood is mounted to the lathe is just the opposite direction. When I would go into complicated live edge bowls, I'd go into crotch pieces or bark enclosed pieces and stuff that has weird bark shapes. But this is just going to be a very simple live edge bowl. You could actually even call it a reverse bowl, where you're just doing the literal opposite of what you would do on a normal bowl, but on the other direction. So mounted it in the chuck. You kind of have to use a spur drive. You can't really use a screw chuck with these kinds of pieces. One, because this is not flat, right? It's curved, so you wouldn't get a good grip with the friction. And second, well, there's all that bark, so the screw's not really drilling into any wood. The last thing that's different about these bowls is that they have a tendency to be a lot more wobbly because of the fact that this is not a perfect cylinder. So we're going to start the lathe up, see how fast we can get it. So we can get it to about 550. Now we're going to start taking the corners off. So another thing that's different about these kinds of bowls is that you're turning a lot of space. So because these wings are a lot higher than this section, you're kind of turning space with the gouge. So you kind of have to take your cuts a little bit more consistently and slowly than when you're just doing a standard regular bowl. And as you can see, this is unbalanced because I have more wood cut off here than I do here. So I'm just going to have to get that perfectly round. Another thing, when you're doing these live edge bowls, as you can see pretty much here, I'm all trued, except for there. because you're trying to keep the bark in, because I find that live edge bowls are kind of are a lot better than just natural edge bowls. Excuse me, which is when the bark isn't there. You don't want to yank the bark off. So when you're coming this way, you're pushing outwards. So the bark can actually peel off the wood. So you want to go the other way. So this way, so that the bark doesn't peel off the wood and actually is pressed against the wood. The only problem is that's a kind of scary cut. Not only is it scary, you have some chances of bogging down the lathe. So I'm just gonna start that up again. And again, just go slowly. You actually raise the feet a little bit. And just get small. Let's look at what we have. So we still have a flat section here, and again, no piece of bark was completely thrown off, so that's pretty good. So with that, I'm just gonna keep doing that here just to get that bit round. Symmetrical to raise the speed. That means the tailstock's not tight anymore. Tighten the tailstock up. Bring the rest in. Check that out. Still have a flat spot. So we're getting there, but still a little bit left to go. That about does it. Let's check it out. Yes. So that's no longer flat. So now we can go back the usual way and take that down to where we want it. To put my tenon on. So I don't want it too big, I don't want it too small. So I'm actually gonna just measure it just to be sure that I don't want it too big, because this is a display piece, so it doesn't need to have a massively huge tenon. But I do want it to look nice. So a little bit smaller than that. Yeah, I'm pretty much dead on. So Alright, now I just want to look at the general shape. I think that could be a little bit better. Just a little bit more swooping. Now I find that it has a little bit of a flat bottom. See that? That's not too bad. Not too shabby. Alright, so that's pretty good. Now, as you can see, this isn't finished. And I usually like to finish my bowls on the lathe and not with jam chucks. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this off if it wants to come off. And I'm going to put it in the chuck and make a recess here to expand it. So I'm going to do that. And yeah. So first things first is to just take the nub off with the classic mallet. Turn it in the line of the grain just to make things easier. Boom. Just to make sure it fits in the chuck. And then we can get the chuck on. Boom. There we go. So, we're good. Get the chuck on. Now, I don't want to stain the tenon, because I think this is going to be close to the final shape, and I'll get into that later when I finish turning this. Let's just get my little key. I'll get that in there. So now we're going to turn a recess. So that's solid. That's true. So now that's all we're going to do. So we're just going to hollow out a bit of the center just to get solid wood. Go in with the square inch paper and get what we need for a recess. I know that's solid wood. This is all bark. That's bark, that's solid. I just want what's solid. I don't need to go too deep. Solid wood. That's all solid. Raise the rest. Square end. That should go in with my big square end. That's all we need, and we're pretty much on solid wood the whole way around, so that's all that really matters. So, let's get this out of the chuck to put it back into the chuck the other way around. So that goes like that. Make sure that it's fully on. That should be pretty true, which it is. Tighten it to make sure. And now all we're doing is making this nice and scraping that and then sanding. That's all we're going to be doing. No major shape change because there's no point. And we don't want to do too much without the support of the tailstock. So get rid of the square end scraper. Get the bowl scraper out. So I raise the rest. That's what we want. Nice shaving. Making sure that's smooth. Turning a lot of space, right? So I have a little ridge there. All that's perfectly smooth, but I do have a ridge here. But if I get to it, I turn like that, and then I get into space. So I have to be very careful. Bring the rest a little bit closer. That's not too bad. That's clean. That's not too bad. So we're going to just make a nice little button here. A little bit. Convex, and then with square end, there we go. Nice little detail. Now we're ready for sanding. So I'm going to skip through the sanding part because it's basically as every other sanding thing that we've done in previous videos, and I'll get it into the chuck ready for hollowing. This is in the chuck, so we're going to start hollowing. First thing, you want to make sure that your gouge is extremely sharp. So let's get to it. So first I want to drill out the center. section the rest so that I can get better. All right. Bark fall off. That was right here. So you try and collect as much bark as you can. Or was it this piece? I think it was this piece right here. Sometimes the bark is just loose and will come off. What you want is you just don't want it to come completely off to have just bare wood. Because obviously this is kind of loose. There's some woods that it's easier to do it on and others not. Ash is a particular one where the bark is quite loose sometimes, even when the wood is just freshly cut. So you just make sure that you're really careful when you go into the wood so that you don't cause any tear out. Now, I'm just doing small sections. Gouge. Again, I'm going to go sharpen this to make sure this is extremely sharp to just get to that final thickness of the rim. So I want to get to about 1/4 of that, but I want to use a very sharp gouge. So I'm going to come here. I'm just going to sharpen it. So this is sharp. Now I sometimes see wood turners try to replace sharpening with the grinder with honing. Don't do that. That is a bad idea. You want it sharp, so you want it to be off the grinder. Don't just constantly hone it. So yeah, a good telltale is if the tool is still this long after 10 years of use, it's never been sharp and it will not be sharp. So sharpen your tools a lot, because a sharp tool will aid and give you a way cleaner cut. I want to do around there. Oh, and that was a piece of bark that came off. Have the piece right here that came off right there, so nothing I can do about that. Sometimes this is why these bowls are more expensive to sell, because they're really tricky. So now I still have a little bit of bark there left, so a trick if I have any CA glue left. Well, I don't have any CA glue left, so we're going to continue with that, and hopefully nothing else comes off. And for chips like this, I usually just use scissors. And you can see that's not super strong, so there's a chance of that coming off. It's always harder with these bowls. I'd like to go thinner than that because I find that that's a little bit thick. But if I do, I run the risk of losing part of the bark. I'm going to try and go a little bit thinner. And I'm just going to move the rest in a little bit. I still have pieces of the bark, and it's quite thick, but I'd rather have a little bit thicker bowl with bark on it than a thin bowl with no bark. So constantly stop the lathe to check. Now that's really thick. That's really thick. That's way, way, way too thick. So I'm gonna go in with the small gouge. Bring that in a little bit closer, just to get as much support as I can, and get that thin. Live edge bowls is that because the wings are unsupported, because you have these two high wings and these two low sections, you have to be very careful to get this right because you can't go back with the scraper. So now I have a few ridges so I can pass back and get a nice curve, and I'm still quite thick. That's not horrible. Not the best. One side seems to be thicker than the other, which is strange. but I don't want to go mess around with that bark anymore. So I'm just gonna get that down, go clean up there a little bit. So I have a ridge right here. Get that down into there, and then do the rest. That is extra thick. Extra thick. So I have a lot of material that I can take away. Going to be somewhat of an enclosed bowl, which is fun. I like making enclosed bowls. Still lots and lots of material to get rid of. That's not too bad in terms of thickness, but I will say it's still thick. I don't like thick bowls, as you might have noticed. So, and that's still quite ridgy. So I'm really good up on the wings, but I have lots of ridges there, so I'm just going to do multiple of swiping passes. Having trouble and having lots of ridges is because the tool is far away from the rest. So the further the tool is away from the rest, the harder it's going to be. Still pretty thick. Still quite thick. Nice and deep bowl. This is a really nice and deep bowl that Now, I can probably get that with a scraper, so I can actually raise the rest, move that in like that. Just make sure that the bark clears the tool post, which it doesn't. This is why you always need to check. Because if the bark smacks that tool post, that's it. Bye-bye bark. So, just like that. Does that clear? That clears. So now we're going to go in with the bowl scraper. Where is my bowl scraper? There's my bowl scraper. Now when you're scraping, you barely need anything, any pressure on the tool. Don't go in like this. You don't need to be leaned over it. Basically, I'm just holding it like that, really. Because if I hold it like this, first of all, my hands is dangerously close to this. One, if it hits, it's going to rip the bark off, which is horrible. It might hurt a lot, but I'm more concerned about the bark. So I really just hold the tool like this to get my hand out of the way. And that's all I need. All I need is that little bit of pressure, and I'm good. So now that's really nice. There's not that many ridges. There's still some, but with live edge bowls it's really hard because I can't support the tool with my hand. It's quite thick, but I'm really stressed about that bark, to be honest. So I'm really stressed about getting the bark to peel off. So it's a little bit thick on the thicker side. When I mean thicker side, I mean, so this is about 1.5 centimeters thick. So it's a chunky bowl compared to the usual 1 centimeters I look for. It's a 0.5 centimeter thick. I think I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's going to be a nice, heavy display piece with bark on it, and which is what I really, really, really want. So I'm just going to get that nub off. There we go. A nice ash live edge bowl. So now I'm going to sand this, and I'm going to skip that part because you don't need to see all the sanding. Alright, so the finished product, a nice live edge bowl. Now I turned another one. Unfortunately the bark came off, so you can really see the difference between both styles. I find that this style, in honesty, is a little bit easier to turn, because you don't have to worry about the bark chipping off. So you can get them really nice and thin, and they do look quite nice. But this is just a wow factor. You know, having the bark there really just brings out what the tree would have looked like when it would have been a complete log. So this is these projects are really fun. You can turn them green because of the shape. It's just a fun project to attempt, whether they be this big or very small. So I hope you try it and attempt it yourselves. And as always, happy turning, and we'll see you next time.